out. Since you are in control, I need to share screen.
You should be able to share screen. Oh,
Okay.
yes, you should be able
Usually it's usually a thing that I can do.
Okay, so at the bottom of your screen,
Yeah.
there should be a thing that says share screen. I think it's green. It's green for me for some reason.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah. Okay.
Last time it was for some reason on the top. I have no idea why.
Yeah, zoom.
Okay. Hello. There we go. All right. All right. My name is Master Raven Mayne. I'm a Laurel from the Aidenvelt. I've been in the SCA since approximately 97. I got my Laurel in 2012. I'm majority of the stuff that I try to do all of the arts. You know, I loved everything about the SCA when I joined. So I was fighting and doing service and doing arts. Go mundanely, I was always in art school, or an art class. Even in college, I wasn't always in art, so I loved art. So a large majority of what I did in the SCA was all doing manuscripts or illuminated manuscripts. And then probably, I don't know, like about 15 years ago or so, I got started into painting on fabric, which is painting on clothes, which there's documentation at the end of my handout, which I will get into the comment section. And on the end of the handout, there's just some, not all, but some of the historical references you can find where they painted on fabric. There's a lot of conjecture and a lot of leaps of painting on clothes, but there's lots of on livery and banners. There's lots of painting on fabric documentation or historical references. So this is just before the pandemic. A lot of this time I would be talking about painting on fabric while I gave people supplies like whatever to start painting something. So I can just talk while everybody paints. So that's why my wife and I created this PowerPoint, so that way a little bit, instead of just staring at me talking, we can kind of, at least you have something else to look at. My process of painting on fabric is very organic. What I mean by that is that I will find something that works. I'll find something that works better. I will stop using something else. I will try and find maybe a better idea. I'll go to people teaching painting on fabric classes or stamping on classes to get a better idea. You know, maybe I'll glean a better idea on how to do things. So majority of this handout is just the stuff that I do majority of the time, but it's not the only things. It's, you know, right now this is everything. And right now, I have an apprentice student that does now paint majority of all the clothes that we do. The side note of that is that the painting on clothes is, from a distance, looks like embroidery from a distance when done correctly. So that's what we do majority of the time. Right now, I paint banners, so that's what I do majority of the day. And I'll try and show an example that I'm working on currently at the end of the class. So these are some of the supplies that you'll need when you start painting. So acrylic paint, there's folk art and Americana. There's a lot of brands out there that you can find at any craft store. There's which I've never used, but there are fabrics that are sold as fabric paint for shirts and things. I've never bought it. I can only assume it's acrylic paint, but I'm not 100% sure. I never used it. When I first started doing a lot of painting on fabric, people would use puffy paint, which is not really a great thing to use, I find, on fabric. I realized later on that puffy paint, if you see it, is just acrylic paint. The nozzle on the bottle is what makes it puffy. So it's just basically acrylic paint. But there are a lot of brands out there. Look for sales. Sometimes you can get them as low as 50 cents for a bottle, a couple ounce bottle. Sometimes they've gone up to $1 and $1 something, $1.50 sometimes. So you got to look for like a good deal. Wait for a sale and buy them. There's a lot of brands out there. Those are just Americana and Folk Art are just some of the brands, and I don't even know if some of them are around because actually the pandemic has killed some of these brands. So be on the lookout for those. For metallics, I use what's called Luminaire or Jacquard. It's a little bit more expensive, but I like it because it has a paint medium in it and infused in the paint itself, so there's no mixing. What the paint medium does is it helps it stay flexible after you've painted it, like latex paint. It's sometimes it's worth it, especially for the metallics. I find is that they have a lot more shine to them. Actually, look almost like shiny gold. But that's just my opinion. But I like Jacquards, and I have some, but I don't use them a whole lot. I do use them a whole lot for metallics, but not a whole lot for the other colors, only because it's so expensive. Because they can go anywhere from $2 to $5 for a little bottle. And the paint goes a long way because of the medium in it. It's very smooth, and you don't really have to do too much to it. And a bottle can go a long way than normal just acrylic paints. As I mentioned, there's a textile medium that you can add, and it's usually 2 parts paint, 1 part textile medium. You can buy it separately. It's usually in the fabric paint section in the hobby stores, not always, but you always have to. If there's usually an aisle with textile paints in it, you should probably look at the whole aisle first, because every store has a different place where they put it. You have to be careful though that there's a textile medium for acrylic paints that they use for portrait painting on canvas, which is a little different kind of acrylic paint. You'll know it's not the one that we use for fabric painting and for these particular purposes, is because it has a different drying time. Because like oils have a certain drying time. So sometimes people for these particular acrylic paints will use a textile medium that slows down the drying time or speeds it up so that they can make portraits or landscape paintings, whatever. And you'll notice on the bottom it'll say, low, slow, medium, fast on it. That's not the one for this particular type fabric painting. You want one that doesn't have a speed to it, just says textile medium. Back before they started making textile medium more available, the old adage was just to add a little bit of water to it. Add water to your acrylics to do a similar thing, to make it, absorb better into the fabric, to grab onto the fabric better, and to also, more importantly, to be flexible, because using just straight acrylic paints works, but over time it does tend to crack and sometimes peel off depending on how much you put on. You can use almost any kind of brush. I use acrylic angle brushes. The reason I do that is because with an angle brush, it's kind of I can use it as a fine point. I can use it as a liner. I can use it as to lay down a whole bunch of paint in one big stroke. But you can use any paint but you want something that stays flat and doesn't, stays brush shaped, because there's some brushes out there like natural hair brushes that aren't really good for acrylics or any kinds of paints like that, because it won't work as well. Make sure whatever you're going to paint on is covered. If you have a table that you don't want paint to go on, majority of the time paint won't go through the fabric, depending on how thick your fabric is, but sometimes it does. So you want to make sure you can put wax paper down, parchment paper down. I sometimes, when I go out to schools to teach, I will bring out a shower curtain, an old shower curtain, and put that over the table, whatever you can to protect the table that you're going to be using. Always have paper towels and if you want a towel that you're not worried about getting paint on, near you at all times. From experience, sometimes hopefully you don't, this doesn't happen to you, but you might spill paint um, on you, on the floor, on the table, on whatever you're painting on, on your hands. Paint likes to get everywhere, not only where you want it, but where you don't want it. So it's nice to have something close by to grab, to hold on to clean yourself up, rather than trying to get up and find something to help clean up. So always have that next to you. For your brushes, it's good to have like a water cup next to you, one preferably that is for brushes only. Because if you ask anybody, whether it's a scribe or any kind of painter that uses water for their brushes, um, sometimes they put their brush unfortunately, in the cup that they're drinking out of. So you got to be careful of that. So always have that cup with water that you're using for your brushes to cleaning, um, between what you're painting or whatever you're doing, at least an arm lengths away and not near where you're painting at. I do recommend weights. It could be any kind of weight that you can think of, paper weight, uh, anything that would be heavy, but is not dirty at all. Just to hold your fabric down. Um, the reason being is you don't want your whatever you're painting on to move at all. If the paint does go through, you don't want your fabric to shift, because then it's going to smear on the other side. So um, you want to have make sure it doesn't move. And historically, what they used to do when they painted on large pieces of paper or large pieces of fabric, because they would pin it down. You can do that too, but sometimes some of the fabrics that you might use stretch, and then when you paint, it's going to look distorted when you unpin it. So I don't recommend it, but historically, that's one of the things you can do. There's also fabric paints that are just little heavy things, but you don't want, like I was mentioning, you don't want something that's going to leave marks on whatever you're painting out. So whatever you use for weights, make sure it's clean. You can also have small painting jars, because there's a lot of times when you buy paint, it's already in a jar, and you want to put it. The first instinct for a lot of the people that paint is to put it on a palette. But when you're painting on fabric, you may or may not use all of the paint that you're using, for that project or at that specific time. So putting it in something else, something smaller, something that you can just refill as you go and close up, is a lot easier than trying to carry the big bottle around with you. Big, it's only 3 or 4 inches, a couple ounces, but still, it's it's easier to get it out of a little thing rather than putting on a pallet and then you wasted a lot of paint. So getting in smaller, especially if you're going to mix a specific color that you want that you can't find, or you want to make up on your own. First, make enough more than you need, because anybody who has ever mixed paints knows that you're never going to get that same color again. So if you mix a flesh color and you like it, make sure that you make a lot of it, because you may be using it more and more over time. Put it in a jar and mark it, flesh whatever color, because you're always going to need more of it every time you mix paints like that. A lot of these paints, like Jacquard and different ones, are heat set, which means after you paint it, they're going to want you to iron it for a certain amount of time, sometimes on high or on medium. Sometimes you'll have to look on the jar, because sometimes they have specific directions. For the longest time, I didn't do that, but I do that now just as a safety precaution. Being in Arizona, everything dries out a lot, and I'm not sure. Someone actually said why, but I couldn't remember the exact reason why you want to iron it. But it just helps it stay, adhere to the fabric better. But when you iron these things, you can't, because it's acrylic. Majority of the time, these paints will, if hot enough, will melt and get on your iron. So you don't want that to happen. So if you iron anything, make sure you iron maybe the back of the fabric and you put something on the other side, so in case it does heat up, it doesn't get on on your iron at least. um, or put something non uh, not like get a lot of hairs on it, like a cherry cloth or anything like that, but something that's you can put on top of your whatever you painted in iron, the top of it, between your iron and what you painted. um, and I usually do it for a couple minutes on high, but like I said, it depends on the paint. Other people have put it, just let it hang dry and then put it into the dryer on high. um, you can't always, for one, you can't always do that, and two, sometimes uh, some of the paints high heat will also reconstitute some of the paint, and then all of a sudden now you got the paint pieces sticking together onto your item, and that's horrible trying to have to pull those apart. So I if you're going to put it in the dryer, put it on low for a very long time or something like that, and even then you have to be very cautious. It's always good to have a piece of fabric, like an old shirt or something like that close by. Sometimes the colors that paint jar says it is, or even example on the jar what it is. Sometimes you can't. It's not actually exact. So having like a piece of fabric around that you can just put a little paint on just to see before you actually put on your item what actual color it is when it's wet, and what actual color it is when it's dry. Just like a little sample piece is always good to have from near you. Um, you always want to have a good sized table um, when you're painting, because most of the times if you do it on a small table, you have to do a little painting, wait for it to dry, and then move your piece, however it is, and then paint, and then move your piece. So if you can do it that way, but if you're going to do a larger piece, you want a bigger table, so that way you can move your chair rather than moving your piece, or your piece on the table. So it's better to move your chair than move the actual piece and leave it where it is. So always do that. I personally, which you don't have to, but I personally use an extra fine point Sharpie to not only trace my drawing onto fabric, um, but also to trace it again after I've painted it to clean up the lines, because just it's called black work and scribal illuminated manuscripts. Is that when you paint something, the paint doesn't dry in a straight line. So what you do is you go over it with outline it again in black, and it kind of cleans it up, so it looks a lot nicer. Like I said, I use a bleed proof Sharpie, extra fine point. It helps uh, do what I need it to do, but a lot of people don't. What you can do, if you have, especially if you have the time, is take a real fine point paint brush and use paint and outline it. And that's the best way to do it. Um, it just takes a little bit longer, but if you're ever hesitant on using Sharpie, that's a better way to go. I only paint on natural fabrics. Um, I only paint, mostly just on linen, a lot on cotton. Anything else that's a blend, or anything else, any other like nylon or anything like that, is just or silk. You can. I painted on silk too. It's not bad, but anything artificial, it's really, even like I said, blends they're going to move it. You already have enough issues making sure that the paint goes on there and stays on there, and they're drawing everything else. You shouldn't really have to worry about the fabric moving in weird directions, or sometimes some of the fabric, if it's too thin, even for natural fabrics, the fabric will move as you paint it. So that's another thing that you probably you won't have to worry about. The next section is fabric preparation. So when you get your fabric, whatever item that you're going to use, you want to wash it in hot water to get it, pre-shrunk as much as possible. The reason being for that is that you also want the fibers in your fabric to be tighter together when you paint, because you want some paint to go between the fibers, but not all of it. As you paint and it dries, it's going to pull the fibers together. So you want an even space weave as possible. No matter what you do, my suggestion is not, if you're going to wash it, not to use anything with dyes or perfumes in it, because a lot of soaps will have any of the dyes and the perfumes and even softeners will adhere to the fat, will adhere to the cloth, and when you try and paint it, it'll be between you and it'll between the fat, the paint and the fabric. So and you don't want that, because then the paint is actually adhering to, you know, the perfume or the dye, and not the actual fabric, and it'll have more of a chance of coming off, you know, later on. So you don't want to do that. Like I said, right on all the settings, make sure you put it together. Design. When you're thinking about what you want to put on your item, do as many prep things as possible. For example, if you're going to paint a tunic or a dress, I suggest printing out your design in different sizes and then pinning them to your item, and then taking a step back and see how it looks. Get an idea of what it's going to look like. Make a drawing and then draw your item on that and see how it looks. You really want to do all those kind of things before you start painting. When it comes to painting clothes, the balance that you're going to want to get is this. You don't want it too large, because too large will add weight to the fabric and pull on the threads, and has more chance of cracking and peeling and everything else. But you don't want it too small. You don't want it to paint on something and not know what it is, because is that, you know, you won't know. If someone can't realize what the design is, it's not going to be very useful. So you have to get the balance in there somehow. So making it different sizes and decide what kind you want. What's on the screen is a dress that we designed, and each one of those little sections are what we're going to paint. So it's kind of like patterned. One of the major suggestions I have for people who are just starting to paint dresses anyway is that they usually make your dress before you paint it. Not only just know where your design is going to go, but sometimes a lot of these dresses will have a long panel on the bottom, where on this one you can see like it's just a red panel. And what you can do is you could take a long piece of fabric that's going to be on the bottom of your dress, and you can paint that panel and then adhere that panel to your dress. So if you mess up the panel some way or somehow or whatever, you're not ruining the whole dress. You're just ruining the panel, and then you can just get some more fabric and start over again. But the reason that when we started painting cloth, historically what they did was they painted fabric usually for drapery or panels, but there are there's no extant pieces, but there are a lot of written down that they did paint clothes, but they painted them for a specific purpose, and they knew that these items were not going to last. So that's one major reason why there's none left. Also because a lot of what they used to seal the paint onto the fabric ate away at the fabric, and also some of the other elements of the paint ate at the fabric. So they weren't going to last that long. But they did paint them for theatrical uses. So every time there's so many theaters, and not every theater can afford to do embroidery or even have gems, let alone anything else. So they would they would make dresses and paint them on. And for anybody who knows about theater, clothes in general didn't last very long, but they would paint them on to look like gems or embroidery or whatever, so they could use them for theater. Um, they also, in Italy, they used them for festivals. So if you wanted to, like we would see most of the time, we would see at a parade or a sports event, where you would paint your face and everything else. But these guys, but they would paint their clothes to look different designs and different outrageous things, and it would usually just last throughout the festival season, and that was it. So the fabric probably wasn't was really, was probably scrap fabric or not really great fabric. Um, and the paint, like I said, it was a caustic, acidic, and a lot of different things that they did to him. So they just weren't for the festivals, and that was it. So, but think about your design before you put it down on whatever fabric you're going to do. The next section is design application. So there's lots of ways to get your design on your fabric. Um, if your fabric, when you're dealing with fabric, it's in ounces. So it's a lighter ounce would be real thinner, a medium ounce, a heavy ounce is really a thick fabric. So a lot of the times I try and paint on medium ounce fabric is pretty good, shirt uh, weight or shirt, normal t-shirt thickness, maybe a little thicker. Um, and I use a light table. So I'll put my design on a light table. These light tables now you can get them for sometimes as low as $10. They do get really expensive. So the one I have is as light as a clipboard, the one that's pictured there, and I think it was $20. And I can play. It has a USB port that you can plug in anywhere rather than just a regular plug-in. I use that also for Scribble, but it works for anything else. But there's a lot of light tables. You don't have to use has a light table either. If you have a glass table, you can put a light underneath it. Maybe a window you could do it on. You could just put your picture on the window and then put your fabric over the top of it, and trace it that way if you want. Um, the other way is depending on how big your design is. Hopefully it's not too big when you're doing fabric, when you're doing clothes. But if you're doing like a wall for like your camp area or anything like that, so you can use an opaque projector. The one picture is from I think the 1800s, but um, the ones you have now, like I said too, you can buy a kid one for $20 or $30, but then they go up to in the thousands too. So depending on how you want to do that, they are making it easier to do projection type stuff, like in they're making it easier to do things like this for lectures and through your phone you're able sometimes to do certain programs, so you can do it there through that way if you want to make something bigger. um, One of the ways is freehand. So if you're really good at artist, you can pencil in and usually design on a piece of fabric, if it's it's white or light. If it's darker fabric, like a dark black or a darker color, um, chalk is a lot better way to get any kind of design on there, even if you're tracing it on a light table or an projector, because the chalk will eventually, wash off if not brush off. So that's a really good way to use it on dark fabric. One of the oldest ways of getting design onto fabric um, is called what they call prick and pounce. And basically what you do is you take a design, whatever design it is, and you poke little tiny holes all along, intermittently all along every line. And then you take that picture with all the holes in it and you put that on top of your fabric. And then it could usually can make a little pouch out of a scrap piece of fabric, and you can fill it full of chalk or any kind of powder. And what you do is you pounce. Um, what they actually used to call is punch too, but you pounce it on top of the drawing with the lines in it, and then as you can see in my in the PowerPoint on the far right bottom is what it looks like after you've done that. After you take the piece of paper off and you're done pouncing it, so you got a rough idea of what everything is. You can go over it with like a fine point marker or a pencil or anything else to try and read connect all the dots, and that will get you the drawing on there. You can use it for any color fabric, but black is what usually majority of the time that you use. You'll have to use something different to get your picture on your item. Next section is application. Before you paint it, like I mentioned earlier, is to iron it, just to get a flat, even surface. You don't want any wrinkles in it. On the PowerPoint here, you can see on the left is one of the banners I was painting on, and on the right there, you can see is a dress, which was somewhere between 100 and 200 inches all the way around. So most of these dresses have a wide, a lot of space on the bottom of the paint. But you want to iron it out. The dress, by the way, is I put it on 2 tables put together. So that way I could just paint, like I said, mentioned earlier, as I move my chair, I'd paint a little and then move my chair and try not to move the piece as much as possible. But when you're painting, you want, as I mentioned earlier with the different kinds of paints, you want your paint to be what we called melted ice cream. So this is where also another balance you have to come in, is that you don't want to make it too thick, because like I mentioned, it'll weigh down the fabric. Also, it'll have a tendency to crack and peel off if you're not careful, if you put too much on it. If it's too watery, it literally will bleed as you put it down. Not a whole lot, but enough to be annoying. So you want to have your paint so that it goes onto the fabric, but it soaks in a little bit. You want some of that's what the medium does, and like I said decades ago, a little bit of water does when you add it to your paint, is you want that paint to stick. You want it to hold on to all of the little fibers on whatever you're painting. So that's the consistency on it. Noticing that in my classes and the people that I teach how to paint, they usually are painting, and you can tell that they're painting too lightly. They're just trying to get the paint onto the fabric, which sounds logical. That's what you're trying to do. But if you look, closer at it microscopically, the paint is just sitting on top, so it has nothing to hold on to. So after they're done, they may have painted a whole piece, but they just slightly painted it on. So you want a brush that's sturdy. So whatever brush you do paint, you want to, as you're going, you want to make sure that not only the paint is going on the fabric, like I mentioned, but you want to make sure that the paint is going in the fabric, so that it's going in a little bit. You don't have to push, you don't have to force it in, because you don't want it to go through necessarily, but you do want to make sure when you're painting it that it's going into those fibers, which is another reason why you want to have a medium in it, or a little bit. In that consistency is because as you're painting it, you can tell that it's over time, that if you do this enough, you'll be able to tell as you're painting it that it's actually going into the fibers as you're painting. And like I mentioned earlier, some of these paints you have to iron on and make sure that it's going on. Be careful where your hand is, where your shirt is, where the table is. You got to be really space aware when you're painting, because like I mentioned earlier, paint will get everywhere. So even if you're as careful as you think you're super careful, paint will get everywhere. I can't tell you how many times I still inadvertently grabbed the paint container, just moved it, and then I tried to do something and realized I had paint on my hand. So as you go, you don't realize it, but always make sure when you're doing when you're painting, actual painting, make sure your paint's not going to spill or anything that you're going to spill within arm's reach for you to spill. And that, every time that you paint a little bit, check yourself and make sure that you're not getting paint all over everything else. Some of the things you can do, pictured here are, on the bottom left is Delta, Americana, Folk Art, and Plaid. Those are all some of the brands that I use, not all of them. Jacquard isn't pictured, which I'll change that for the next time I teach this class. To the right is all of the textile mediums. The one in the black is the one you don't want. That is the one, the black label and the white lettering. That's, if you see that one, don't use that one, because that's the one that's for the painting on, canvas for painting. You don't want to use that kind of textile medium. So what you can do, because you don't have to, but I've experimented in this myself, is that you can do a finishing coat. So what happens is that you paint something, and what will happen is you will paint whatever it is you're painting, and all the fibers will be will dry, and as they dry, it'll pull the fibers together. So what you can do is you can do what's called acrylic sealer, and what it is, it should be in the acrylic paint section, and what it does is, I use ultra matte because matte is too glossy, and obviously gloss is too glossy. But what happens is the fabric will, like I said, will shrink as it dries. You can't really see it too much, but if you look really close, you can tell that it's pulling all the fibers together. And what this does is, if you do an acrylic coat over the top of it, you can't tell, once you paint it on, you can't tell that you did it. But if you looked really close, it will fill in all those sections where between the paint and the next thing of paint, between those little sections that have been pulled apart. So it actually seals the whole thing and makes one thing tight. The bad thing about that is that it adds more weight. So if you're going to paint clothes, you don't want to do that. But if you really are worried about your design coming off, this will make it impossible for it, maybe to come off in the future, because sweat and body and dirt and everything else, and will take a beating on painting. But this will help if you use one. And like I said, ultra matte is the best to use. I used matte once, and it changed my the dress that I painted to look like it had decals on it rather than embroidery. So it ruined the whole dress that I painted. So I use ultra matte. Like I mentioned earlier a couple times, heat setting. Even if it doesn't say heat setting, I heat set stuff all the time, just to make sure that it's an extra precaution, just to make sure that my paint, adheres to what I'm doing. If you spill something, hopefully you don't, but sometimes it's inevitable and things happen. Hopefully you can wash that one section maybe in a little bowl with a little soap and water and try and get as much paint out as possible. Black is the most forgiving fabric, because a lot of the times you can't just paint black over some of the spills, some of the mistakes. But if you're gonna wash some of the spill or mistake is a big mistake, not a little mistake, as much as possible. Little mistakes, you might have to do a design alteration just so it doesn't come out, but so you can hide it. But I've been lucky and been able to get fast enough to the bathroom and get into a sink. But if not, if it's just a little spot, what I'll do is I grab let it dry. If it's just a small little speck, I'll let it dry, and then I'll go back with a curved X-Acto, and I'll try and scrape just the paint off as much as I can. Sometimes it works. Other times I actually have to mix paint to try and match the fabric, which is almost completely is impossible. But some of the fabrics I'm able to get close. Um, so little mistakes are easily fixed. Big mistakes, if you can't wash it out, it's going to be hard. Like I said, you're going to have a design alteration rather than or a redo rather than trying to fix. Um, that is some of the things about working with mistakes. Um, like I mentioned with black, you can paint over it after everything's dry, or have another design with it. Um, if you're painting clothes, what you want to do is, I'm touching way too many things, so it's kind of messing me up. Hold on. Let me get back to it. It's taking care of your fabric. So if you're going to make a dress or something like that, you're going to have to take care of it. So once you've taken once you've painted, if you're going to paint a dress or paint a shirt or whatever, or a tunic or whatever you're going to paint, you have to take care of it because you can't just wash it normally. Best thing to do is turn it inside out when it's in the washing machine to try and make sure that the washing machine doesn't take off any of the paint. You want it most of the time. I recommend that you hand wash it. If you don't have a hand washing or a delicate cycle on your washing machine, just to make sure that you're not doing any more damage to it. But you can do it in a washing machine, like I said, on delicate maybe. If you can't wash the whole thing by hand, I recommend you wash it by hand. When you dry it, the best thing to do is to hang it up and dry it. If it has too much paint on it, and it looks like it might pull on the fabric, what you want to do is just lay it out and dry it, if you can do that, and then iron it later. Like I mentioned before, sometimes when you put these things in a dryer, the paint will start to heat up and then stick to each other, stick to another painted section or another part of the whatever you're painting. So you want to do that. So you want to be really careful when you do that kind of stuff. So if you have to put it in the dryer on air dry, if you don't have an air dryer, you might want to hang it up. But if you can't do any of those things, low heat should work, but just be prepared to not know what's going to happen when you get everything out of the dryer. Just expect this to not be surprised if something happens while it's in the dryer. But that's about it. That's all I have for this class. So does anybody have any questions about anything that I talked about? Because I gave a lot of information and I haven't been able to see the chats. So if anybody has any questions, you can go ahead and unmute or anything if you want.
Okay, so you recommended going over with a line with a Sharpie. Like that's something I do when I do elimination.
Yeah.
Not necessarily with a Sharpie, but it's a fancy Sharpie. But does it look okay? Like when you create something, like should I do, if I'm working on black fabric, which is what I'm doing,
right?
I want to have that line. Should I use black? Should I use a different color? I have fabric markers. Should I do that?
You really have to be careful of fabric markers. I have bad experiences with them. I had a fabric marker that said green, that was green, said bleed proof, everything possible that it was going to be fine. And it washed and now it's green tinted. So they lied. So I never trust fabric pens at all with anything. I wanted to, believe me, there's a lot of designs that I would rather use fabric paint pen marker and used on stuff, but I haven't trusted anything and it
Okay.
does that. The only thing I trust more than anything else, I guess, is Sharpies. But the neat thing for me, probably not for anybody else, but for me, sometimes when I will trace a design out on black fabric, I will use a silver Sharpie
Hmm.
or a gold Sharpie, depending on how what works. It doesn't always work because in the Sharpies it's alcohol and paint
Hmm.
inside. So what happens is sometimes there's too much alcohol and it won't come out silver on the fabric, which is when I have to revert to doing chalk. Um, but sometimes it does work, and uh, the reason what I the reason I like it is because sometimes it really looks fine just doing that on some fabric. It's really kind of cool just to have an outline of a design on a black dress or in a black tunic
Hmm.
that's just outlined in silver. I think it looks really cool. So they look kind of good, and then obviously we have to go, to finish it, we have to paint it. But sometimes it looks really cool just to have something outlined in silver on fabric.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I have to work on that.
But mostly my advice is just to practice a lot on different stuff because it's really, a lot of paints, not everything's up to you and how you want to do stuff, and not every paint does go bad. It starts clumping on itself if you have it too long. So there's a lot of little quirks and stuff that you'll learn after you painted stuff for going over a while. Um, and what I do, like I said, is I use it to make it look like embroidery, like or trim on things that I paint when it comes to clothes. But um, if you do any more than that, like I said, it'll weigh down the fabric and it'll pull on it, and sometimes it'll rip. We've actually had some fabric that just fell apart and had nothing in it. And the paint just didn't help it. The paint just killed it. So, but let me, if I can do this, let me see. I'm going to change my camera. So this is what I'm working, or what I usually do most of the day. If you can see my picture, basically, these are full achievements. So I don't know if you can spotlight that or not, bring that up, if I can do that.
I think it is. It is spotlighted, so it's your
Oh,
camera.
is it?
So you
Okay.
should be able to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, it's just me then. It's human error. So this is one of the things that I do. I basically this is what I do all day long because I am severely handicapped. So this is kind of what I do for people. I'll have people give me their SCA devices and design elements, and then we'll put them all in PowerPoint, and we'll have people kind of look at them, and we pick and choose, and we have there's like a base. Everything's kind of base. This one doesn't have on this section. I'll paint it white and I'll put like their model down here. Um, but this is ones for two of our friends that moved away. He's a Laurel. She's a countess and mistress of Pelican, which I use a lot of heraldic elements, but some of the heraldic designs in throughout history are designed by people who have never actually seen the items, the animals, especially the animals that they've seen. So sometimes they'll take like a rough idea of what heraldically they look like, and I'll find a better drawing, on in Pinterest or on Google somewhere and do that. But
I do.
this is just one that I'm working on. My latest one I'm working on, but so far this will be my 65th one that I've done for 60. I've done 65 of them for different people. So, and
I
this was
know.
a
Oh,
this is a combined one for two people. So,
I know that heraldry thing when you're looking for something. Like I was trying to find one of a heraldry of an alligator because I live in Florida, and I was making a
right,
very Florida scroll, and I
yeah,
wanted to put a musical instrument of like an alligator playing a cowbell as
yeah,
marginalia. Yeah, and I found one of a crocodile, and I'm like, that's the least amount. Like, I don't know how you can get that wrong, but they did. They got it very wrong. So
Yeah, for some reason I don't know why, but I went down this small rabbit hole. It wasn't a big rabbit hole. There was differences between alligators and crocodiles, and even though they look similar, they are so separate on the.
they're not genetically alike.
They're not genetically, yeah. So
Yeah.
they never.
They just fill the same niche. They just,
Yeah,
one has more teeth. One has teeth
yeah,
that stick out. One that have teeth that don't stick out, but they're not related. So that,
yeah. They
yeah,
can't. They can't. They can't. You can't have a what's it, a liger
yes.
like creature
Well, okay, I'm going to go on a
or a
deeper
mule.
rabbit hole that is not related to this, but we just keep on making crabs. Like, crabs keep existing. They keep coming up as like that shape
Yeah,
keeps
yeah,
coming up, and they're not related. You're like, that's really definitive. Like, what? Crabs?
yeah,
Anyway,
yeah.
the end.
Yeah, if you go with Alton Brown, there's a he has a obviously I watched all his shows too, but he's got one thing that depending on where you get that crab, it could be a different species, or it could be what that area gave that name to that crab. So like you can find a crab that's like maybe um, like New Jersey, I guess, off the shores of New Jersey, but they've named it a certain crab. That's the crab, they've named it. That's what that crab is. But that's similar crab or that similar species in a different area, that region gave it a different name. So you have to be careful when you go buy crab because it could be the same, it may not be the same. So all kinds of weird things when it comes to that kind of stuff. So with your project, did this help?
Yes,
Okay.
very much. I don't want to talk about it too much because I'm
Yeah,
still
no.
recording. Should I stop recording? I'm going to stop
Yeah,
recording.
go ahead.
Okay, bye.